With the first half of the season wrapping up for baseball, it's time to look back at some of the guys who just didn't cut it. What do you do with these players going forward? Let's talk about the 5 biggest first half busts among all hitters in fantasy baseball. If we're going to talk about disappointments, I think it's only right that we start with the Mets. Yes, you did see maybe a little twinkle in my eye there as a Marlins fan. By the way, did you know if the season ended today, the Marlins would be in the playoffs? All right, but for fantasy purposes, probably the guy that was the most disappointing, I think, relative to where he was drafted for the Mets, I'm going to go with Jeff McNeil. Lindor's average isn't good, but he's giving you 17 home runs and 9 steals. Alonso is hitting bombs. McNeil is the guy who's really been most disappointing because last year, he won the batting title, hit .326. This year, not even close to that. He's hitting a pedestrian .258. That's backed up by an expected batting average that's right in the middle, 51 percentile. That's a problem because he doesn't give you power and he doesn't really steal bases. Got 3 home runs on the season, 4 stolen bases, and you know he isn't all of a sudden going to go on a power binge or swipe a bunch of bases. That's just not what he does. He's supposed to help you in batting average. It's really surprising because pretty much every season other than 2020, which look, we'll give a lot of players a pass on that short season, but he's hit well above 300. That's his thing. How do you go from being the best hitter in the majors to just mid? Maybe it's the team environment. Who knows what the problem is? I mean, is this team going to switch things up? You know, McNeil will still be playing every day, but is he going to be worth playing in fantasy? I think you stick with him because he can turn it around. There's really no reason I can pinpoint to think why he's not hitting well. You know what? You just have to know to temper your expectations. If you do have a better option, go for it. But at this point, I would say don't drop him if you don't need to. Just hope that the Mets maybe make a change at manager. I don't know what. Maybe they get inspired. But McNeil, he should be better even if he doesn't nearly match what he did last year. Now here's a big name, a guy who you expect a ton from. Maybe those expectations were a little low this year because coming off an injury, didn't play until May. But once Bryce Harper was cleared and he went back to the everyday lineup, you know what you expected was a ton of home runs, of course, helping you to average, but helping you everywhere. This is a guy who is an MVP. Well, you know, his average is fine and otherwise he's producing, but can we really say that he's doing okay? 3 home runs, and we're not looking at a small sample right now. 226 plate appearances, and he's only gone deep 3 times. At this point, if you were stashing him or if maybe you traded and bought low on him in the beginning of the season, you're pretty disappointed because this is a guy who should be going for 40 jacks. Maybe you talk about, coming back and getting into shape in a short season. At least 25? Can we get to double digits at this point? So is it the elbow? I mean, what's going on here? Doesn't look like anything's bothering him. He hasn't returned to the injured list. He's been playing pretty much every day. But it could be kind of one of those subconscious things where it's altering his approach. What I've noticed with Harper is that his ground ball rate is up, his fly ball rate is down, and that's shifted his launch angle. It's down at 7.6 degrees. His ground ball rate is up to 46.5%, and for him, that's the highest since 2014. It's also worth noting this isn't just a launch angle thing. His hard hit percentage is also the lowest it's been since 2016. It's a common thing with football players to say, a year off of ACL, you give them time to recover and to get back to full speed. Well, we think with pitchers, a year off of Tommy John, you got to give them time to rehab, get back into shape. We don't really think about that with hitters and those kind of serious elbow injuries, but that might be the case here. Harper, yeah, he's out there, he's playing, but think about Ohtani when he first came back from his injury and he was out there. He didn't look like he does now. I think this might be kind of a year for Harper. I don't say a lost year because he's still hitting for average and he's doing okay, but I don't think you're going to get anywhere near peak potential Harper. So I'm a little worried here. The panic meter is kind of in the middle, but at this point, man, I'd be looking to move on from him. And then let's not even waste any time with this one. If you have Tim Anderson, who used to be one of the best players in all of fantasy, I mean, just get out now. I think at this point, it's clear he is not what he used to be. A weighted on base average of 242 is actually one of the worst in all the majors. And now it's become kind of a running joke here. Tim Anderson, not a single home run on the season. He's officially been outslugged by some pitchers who haven't even hit this year. What's alarming with Anderson is not just a drop in power, it's also a drop in average, which is, again, a guy who, like McNeil, would hit over 300 regularly. It's even his defense. What about speed? Nope, he's not even above league average in terms of sprint speed. I mean, I don't know if as soon as he turned 30, everything just fell apart. But at this point, I mean, Anderson just looks like a shell of himself. So I would definitely be panicked. Trade him for whatever you can if you have him. By the time the second half rolls around and he doesn't change, you might just wind up cutting him. And then another shortstop I'm not quite as worried about. But, I had some people asking me when I did my last panic video, what about Willy Adames? Some people are thinking maybe he should be on the cut list. It's time to ditch him. Well, all right, the average, yeah, it's pretty bad, 206. But, he's giving you some power, 12 home runs on the year, 37 RBIs, a 26% strikeout rate. For him, that's actually not too bad. That's right on par with his career mark. And that's really not that bad these days for a guy who gives you power. So on one hand, I'll say with Adames, this is kind of what you should have expected. It's what he is. He's a guy who hits for power, not necessarily for average. We were fooled a little bit because when he first went from Tampa to Milwaukee, he was hitting for average. He was hot on fire as soon as the second half, came around in 21 and he was flipped to the Brewers. Yeah, he was hitting way above 300 and then cooled down a little bit. The following year, settled into a little bit more decent, but not great average. And that's why he was traded from Tampa Bay. His average just isn't cutting it, and there's been a steady drop ever since he was in Tampa. Now, maybe we didn't think it would be this bad, but again, he's just kind of falling back to what he was. He'll still give you some power. He'll still give you some RBIs. But, don't expect a change here. He is what he is. If you can live with that average, I just hold on, I suppose. And then we started with the Mets, but I think we also have to include the next most disappointing team here is the San Diego Padres. You're not really doing much with their star players. Those guys will be fine, and they've been okay. Jake Cronenworth, not so much. This is a player who has hit for average, but he is down to 208 this year. And if you look, this is also a trend, kind of like with Adames, you've seen his XBA has been going steadily down. It's to the point now where he can't even hit breaking stuff. Is he making up for it in other categories? Not too much. 7 home runs, 3 stolen bases. The RBI and run totals are okay, but again, we want more than okay in our fantasy lines. If guys hurting us in batting average and not getting us those crucial counting stats, I think it's time to look for something better. His name value alone, might get you something at the trade deadline. Somebody's desperate. Somebody still thinks he'll turn it around. This isn't somebody who's just struggling, who's going through a cold spell. Like I said, this is a trend that's been happening. This is a team that is just underperforming across the board. Cronenworth wasn't drafted super high in fantasy leagues, but he was counted on to be an everyday starter in your lineup. He shouldn't be that anymore. I'm also going to give you my top 5 busts at starting pitcher for this season. But first, check out which pitchers you should be trading for or trading away before the trade deadline comes.